Hello and welcome. Ray Chrisman here from R.L. Chrisman Metalworks. Well, I'm finally going to get around to installing the DRO on my Birmingham YCL-1340 Metal Lathe. Before I get started with the installation though, I'm going to have to take the backsplash off the back of the lathe so that I can access the back part of the bed to install the scale back there. Before I get to all of that though, I'm going to turn the camera off for a minute. I'm going to get all the parts out for the DRO and we'll kind of look through what we have there for parts, and then we'll go ahead and start with the installation. I'll be right back. Got all the parts laid out here so we can take a quick look at them. This here is going to be our readout itself, which will eventually mount up there above the headstock. Along with that, there's a little bit of associated hardware here. We have both of our scales and scale covers here. This is going to be the scale for the x-axis, which is going to be travel in this direction. This scale will actually mount on the side of the cross slide over here. And we put that on. And once again, that's the x-axis scale. And here is the mounting rail back here and the cover for that x-axis scale. Will actually fit up inside of it like that on the side of the cross slide. And there's a little bit of associated hardware here that goes with that. This here is the z-axis scale, which will mount on the back of the bed of the lathe. It will actually mount back in here, and then the reed head will be attached to the carriage. This is the cover for that scale, along with the mounting rail here on the back of it. A little bit of associated hardware there and here. This is the mounting bracket and arm for the readout itself. This will actually bolt on the back of the headstock there. The arm will come out here. The readout itself will mount up here so you can pivot that around. This is some of the assorted mounting brackets that came with it. There's a long L bracket, a short L bracket, a couple of different sized flat brackets here. There's some zip ties in this bag. There's a little bracket here that looks like it's probably for the reed head for one of these scales. So anyway, that's our parts and pieces. Now I'm going to get the backsplash taken off of the lathe, and we will probably mount the z-axis scale first and then move on to the x-axis scale, and we'll do a short series on this just like we did with the RF31 mill drill. So I'll be right back. Okay, here's a shot looking down the bed of the lathe on the back side. Show you what I've done here real quick. Camera might be a little shaky, but I'll show you what I've done. Before I took the backsplash or chip guard off, I marked where it came to. It sits from here out to this point, because I know I can't go past that. I marked both ends. Down here at the other end of the lathe, it comes to right here. Then I measured the mounting rail for the scale, and it is shorter than that distance. So what I'm doing is I'm centering the mounting rail between those two outside marks where the chip guard goes, which is going to pretty much center the mounting rail or the scale on the bed of the lathe. So this mark here is where the end of the mounting rail will go. And then down here at the other end, this was the mark for the splash guard or chip guard. This is the mark for where the mounting rail will go. Now I've already gone through and center punched the holes that I need to drill and tap. There's the first one right here. There's the second one right here. And the third one is right there. There's three mounting bolts hold that rail on. Now what I did was I want the mounting rail below that split right there, because if I ever do want to remove that gap bed in the lathe, I don't want it interfering with the scale. So I want the rail down below that. So what I did was I got some spacers that were about 2.5 inches long. Got two of them that were identical. And I set them up between the bottom of the bedways here and down at the other end down here, so that I could hold the mounting rail up there and have it parallel to the ways of the bed, so that I could mark where I needed to drill and tap those holes. I used 2.5-inch spacers because it gave me just about the right distance that I wanted below this gap in the bed, which will also give me the distance I need between all of these bolts on the carriage should I ever have to adjust those. I don't want them interfering with the scale. So I'm going to go ahead and drill and tap those holes, and I'll be right back. Okay, here's a quick shot of the holes after I drilled and tapped them. Now these are for M5 screws. So I drilled them with a number 19 drill bit, tapped them with an M5 tap. There's the first hole down at the tailstock into the lathe. There's the second hole. It's about in the middle of the bed. The third hole is right down there towards the headstock into the lathe. Now there is one thing I've noticed on this that I'm going to have to deal with, and I'm not sure if I'm going to deal with it on this mounting rail or in the reed head. But this bed on this lathe has a taper to it, and let me move the camera around here where I can show you that a little better. Okay, looking down the bed of the lathe from the tailstock end, I don't know how well this is going to show up on the camera, but the back side of that bed tapers inward from top towards the bottom, and I haven't measured the taper yet to see how much taper it is. Like I said, I'm not sure if I'm going to deal with it in this mounting rail for the scale, or if I'm going to deal with it in the mounting bracket for the reed head, but somehow I'm going to have to allow for that taper. It's actually quite a bit. Doesn't really show up real well on the camera, but there is quite a bit of taper there. So at some point I'm going to have to deal with that. But for right now, I'm going to put the screws into the mounting rail and get it up there so you can see what that looks like. Okay, There is the mounting rail for the scale, mounted on the back of the lathe, bolted to the bed. I opted not to use the center bolt. It seemed like that bed had a wave in it from end to end, so I just put the two end bolts in the rail. I put about 22 thousandths worth of shims behind the rail right at the bolts, and then I used my caliper like this and got a measurement right above the bolts on each end from the top of the rail to the bottom of the machine surface of the ways, and got them so that they're both the same at each end. There's the measurement that I have, and they are the same at each end. So that way I know that the rail is perfectly parallel to the ways. Yeah, we may be half a thousandths off, but that's close enough. Okay, here's a shot of the scale mounted on the lathe, bolted up to that mounting rail. I had to shim the mounting rail at both ends because there was actually a hump in the middle in the bed of the lathe. So I had to shim out both ends of the rail and then readjust the height on it. But the rail is running true now. It's parallel with the bottom edge of the ways, and with the dial indicator mounted on the cross slide and run from end to end on the bed, the rail is also perfect from end to end. So I went ahead and bolted the scale on it. The reed head you can see is down at the other end of the scale there. It has not been mounted yet. That's the next step, is I need to mount that that reed head and attach it to the carriage. So I'm going to work on that next. Here you can see that I've gone ahead and installed the cover on top of the scale. I also went ahead and drilled and tapped 2 M5 holes right here in the back of the saddle. I'm going to put this mounting bracket on there. This is one of them that came in the kit, the long angle plate. I had to modify it slightly. These slots here weren't quite as long as what they are now. They were shorter, like these ones down here. I lengthened them out up towards the top edge of that plate. If I hadn't mounted the scale so low on the back of the lathe, I wouldn't have had to do that. But like I said, I wanted to get down below that gap, that removable gap on the bed up there. So anyway, all I did was just slot those angle brackets a little more, and they will bolt right into those 2 holes, and then it will bolt into the bottom of the reed head. So I'll be back when I get that bolted on. Okay, I'm back here once again. You can see I got the bracket bolted on there to the back of the saddle with the carriage there that holds the reed head. It's also bolted onto the bottom of the reed head right there, so that when that carriage moves back and forth, that reed head will move along the scale and we'll get a readout. So anyway, that completes the installation of the Z-axis scale on my Birmingham YCL-1340 Metal Lathe. The next video, we will install the X-axis scale on this lathe. Anyway, till next time, happy machining.